Good morning, Year 8. This is just a quick catch-up and a quick summary of the work that you should have completed during weeks 1 and 2 of the school being closed due to the coronavirus. First of all, I want to say thank you and well done to the many people that have got in some fantastic work to me over the last few weeks. Those of you that have not done the work, you need to use this opportunity to maybe pause in certain places and make notes and fill out some of those online worksheets that we have sent out to you via Show My Homework. A propaganda poster entitled "Daddy, What Did You Do in the Great War?" So some of you commented on this and asked questions on it, and basically this is what we've got here for this particular piece of propaganda. It's created during the First World War. So this would have been created in 1914 when the war started and when the government were trying to get young men to enlist to fight for their country. And what we've got is a scene in the future. So someone in 1914 is looking into the future and they are basically saying, what are your children going to think of you if you did not join up and fight in the Great War? So you've got the children, the little boy playing with his soldiers, you've got the girl on her father's knee and asking, reading about the Great War and saying, well, Daddy, what did you do during that war? And as you can see, he has to pause to think. So we need to think to ourselves, did he join the First World War? Maybe he did not sign up to fight for his country during the war and he feels like he is a coward. So why would this poster be created in 1914? Well, it's to make men feel guilty for not joining the war and not fighting for their country. So it's a guilt trip. It suggests that these men would bring shame upon their family. So it is not absolutely true. People that didn't sign up to fight for the war were not necessarily cowards. They were not necessarily bringing shame upon their family. But this is propaganda to try and persuade men to join the war, to join the war effort. And we've got three very similar ones here that you should have looked at as well. And I've read through some of your work, and most people have got this absolutely right in commenting and answering questions on these propaganda posters. This one here, we've got Lord Kitchener, and he was considered a war hero. So it seems to make sense, doesn't it, to have a war hero on a propaganda poster pointing at you, saying your country wants you, God save the king. It is Lord Kitchener, and he led the British Army as an officer during many wars and conflicts, notably when the British invaded Egypt in the 1880s, the Sudan in 1896, and I think he became Field Marshal for the Boer Wars in South Africa, where the British fought against settlers from the Netherlands and South Africans as well, in order to keep control of that area of South Africa. And in 1914, he joined the British government as Secretary of State for War. So he was a very iconic figure. And if he's on a poster pointing at people saying you should join the war, then that's going to be very persuasive. And if we have a look at the second one here, okay, so these are the women of Britain. So these women, their roles in society at the time would have been as wives, as mothers, etc., as daughters, and they are persuading their men to go and fight for their country. It suggests that the men are protecting the women and families at home by doing so, by going to war. And we've got this common theme, haven't we? When we look at the third one, what are you prepared to do? Well, once again, if we look at that circle that I've just brought up on the third one, this idea about bringing shame on your family if you don't go to war. These men apparently owe their loyalty to their country and to King George V, who was the monarch at the time. And these are some of the pieces of work that I have received from you guys. So again, we've got people that have included Kitchener. They've looked at the resources that we've given them, and they've used Kitchener. We've got one here. I don't know if you can see the second one. but it's quite faint. But this student has drawn a white feather, because the white feather was something that was given to men who didn't go and fight during the war. The white feather symbolizes being a coward. Okay, we've got this one here on the right hand side. This student has again used this idea of pledging loyalty to the king, and the student that has designed theirs also on the computer has drawn their hero, their version of a hero soldier, and again appealing to people by using guilt and emotional blackmail. What would your wife and children think of you, and what can you do for your country? Save the country with your bravery. Okay, so now we get onto the section about trench warfare.
Life in a trench, I'd like to explain in one word: horrific. It's mud, it's death, it's rats, it's stench, and soldiers develop an attitude in the trench that everybody is going to die.
Life in the trench was abysmal. There were several lines of trenches, and the front line trenches, of course, were the most dangerous because they were constantly under fire. Into the!
The Germans dug assiduously, building dry, safe, and comfortable trenches for themselves, with bunkers that actually had electricity and sometimes running water. The British and French, who were convinced that they were never going to be there for that long, didn't spend nearly the same effort. So their trenches tended to be muddy and wet and not that safe.
So then we get a taste of just how horrendous life in the trenches indeed was. And why were the conditions so bad, especially in the French and British trenches? Well, one of the historians there said that maybe the British especially did not expect the war to last that long. We must have heard of this phrase, it will be over by Christmas. Well, of course, it wasn't over by Christmas 1914. It lasted 4.5 years. And if the trenches were so bad, then why were they set up? Well, first of all, they were dug by British and French armies in northern France in what was known as the Race to the Sea. So the aim of trenches was to act as a barrier against the German army that was making attack via Belgium. Okay, so from which a counterattack could be made. At first, they were quickly and easily constructed using few materials other than sandbags and shovels. Obviously, that is why the conditions were so poor. They were meant to be temporary, but they weren't. Obviously, they lasted for 4.5 years. So in that time, can we imagine what it might have been like to have lived in those trenches? We'll get onto that soon. So they were where most of the war were fought, and this is due to the fact that the war became a stalemate. You had the British on one side, and you had the Germans on the other. And every week, tens of thousands of men would be sent to fight each other into no man's land. And when you've got loads of guns, machine guns, mustard gas flying around, it becomes a complete and utter lottery. Okay, there's no kind of skill, fighting, or really good tactics involved. A lot of the men are just immediately killed by flying bullets, and this makes the war become a stalemate. And a stalemate, I usually, at this point in the lesson, I usually ask the class what is meant by stalemate, and one or two hands go up, and I usually get the same answer: sir, it means a draw. It doesn't quite mean a draw. Okay, those of you that play chess will know that a stalemate is when neither side can win. Okay, which is a little bit different to a draw. This is when it's impossible for either side to win, and that word is used a lot within relation to the First World War. So the three main battles where the Germans attempted to break through, that was at Verdun, the British at the Battle of Somme, and Passchendaele in 1917. So the advantages, if we just go over this again, the advantages of building trenches, of fighting a war using trenches, was that they were easy and quick to make. They were relatively easy to defend because they were dug underground. The bunkers were underground. They were cheap to build: wood, sandbags, shovels, and you didn't really need that many men to defend them. Now, the disadvantages: they were wet and cold. Can you imagine living in those conditions, you know, November, December, January time, when there's snow or heavy rain? Okay, and you know, you're just constantly walking in water, in puddles, you know, maybe up to a meter deep, something like that, of water. So that's how soldiers got very ill. If they weren't being shot to death, then they were getting very ill, trench foot and other kind of life, you know, which became life-threatening diseases. It's hard to get in and out without being seen by the enemy. That is why it's known, when you come out of the trenches, you go into no man's land. Very, very dangerous. Trenches were very dirty and unhygienic. There was no running water or no flushing toilets. Now, again, you can see how that is going to lead to disease. Now, I hope you were original in your diary task. So writing a diary for the day. This is one that I have got from the BBC Bite Size website, to give you an idea of maybe what you should have written down. So we've got very, very long days, very tiring days, as well as obviously being very dangerous, and a lot of the life-threatening kind of hazards that I've already mentioned. So this is a photograph of no man's land in Flanders Field, France, 1919. So obviously photographers were able to actually get into what used to be no man's land by 1919, because the war had been over, you know, for several months by then. Okay, so just to recap, no man's land was the kind of the unclaimed territory between the British trenches and the German trenches. Every week, men from both sides would be sent over the top of the trenches to attack the opposition. Thousands of men were killed immediately by machine gun fire or mustard gas. So it became a very, very pointless exercise. Thousands of men would be sent over. Thousands of men would be shot and immediately killed. But you know, those high in command were still, you know, sending men over the top, even though it became very obvious that they were going to die, or at least, you know, many of them were going to die.
Oh, there's a nasty splinter on that ladder, sir. A bloke could hurt himself on that.
Stand ready!
I have a plan, sir.
Really, Boric? A cunning and subtle one?
Yes, sir.
As cunning as a fox who's just been appointed Professor of Cunning at Oxford University?
Yes, sir.
On the signal, company will advance! Well, I'm afraid it'll have to wait. Whatever it was, I'm sure it was better than my plan to get out of this by pretending to be mad. I mean, who would have noticed another madman around here? Good luck, everyone.
Okay, and finally, we move on to the section about war poetry. What passing bells for these who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifles' rapid rattle can patter out these hasty orisons. No mockeries for them, no prayers nor bells, nor any voice of mourning shall save the choirs, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells and bugles calling for them from sad shires. What candle may be held to speed them all? Not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes, shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their power. Their flowers, the tenderness of patient minds, and each slow dusk a drawing down of blinds. Wilfred Owen was a soldier from World War One. He shows the horrors of war and how it leads to death and sorrow. This is a very different message of the posters that you looked at the week before that we spoke about earlier in this streamed lesson. Wilfred Owen clearly believes the war is not the adventure that many other writers and members of parliament and journalists were suggesting that it was. In the very first line, Owen compares those who have died in the war as cattle. So, in other words, cows that are to be slaughtered for their meat and sometimes milk. And look at the words that he uses. Okay, so guns, rifles, bells, choirs, bugles, all of these we can imagine the sounds. Okay, so we imagine either sounds of violence, or the sounds that we hear maybe at a funeral that are commemorating those that have died. Now, orisons, this idea of hasty orisons. Now, to my knowledge, orisons means a prayer or to pray. Now, Wilfred Owen was a Christian, and he believed that this war, the violence of it, did not fit in with the Christian beliefs of many of the British people and German people. Now, what I also want you to think about is, do you think that his poems were published that regularly during the First World War between 1914 and 1918? I would say not, because they're not supporting the war. He was more famous after he had died and in the years following the war. Okay, you mate. I hope that was helpful. Once again, if you have not done the work, or if you have done the work and there were areas that you weren't quite sure of, then use this video, go back, pause certain things and make notes. And I will try and make another video for the work that you are completing in the meantime. So stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you again soon.